This story is inspired by a real moment from Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom. A moment so delightfully unexpected. It filled the room with laughter and left everyone walking out a little lighter. It's not just a case about a parking ticket. It's about a 6-year-old girl, a judge with a warm smile, and a courtroom that briefly felt more like a family breakfast table than a place of law. Stay with me until the very end, I promise. Not a single second of this story will feel wasted. The morning sun slipped gently through the tall windows of the Providence courtroom. The air still carried the chill of early spring, and most people in the room wore jackets buttoned up to their necks. A few clutched papers in their hands, glancing at them nervously. Others just sat still, waiting. In the far corner of the courtroom, Carl adjusted the legs of his camera tripod. He had been filming Judge Frank Caprio's court sessions for over 5 years. Most journalists covered crime, corruption, or political scandal. But Carl had a different beat: kindness in a courtroom. He often joked, "This man's courtroom is the only place in the city where justice walks in wearing a smile." The courtroom door creaked softly as a young woman entered, holding the hand of a small girl with braids tied neatly in pink ribbons. The girl wore a matching pink dress and a pair of white sneakers with scuffed toes. They looked around, slightly unsure, until their names were called. Judge Caprio looked up, his glasses resting at the tip of his nose. He offered a warm smile that softened the formality of the space. "Good morning," he said. "How are you today?" The little girl clung to her mother's side. Several people in the courtroom smiled quietly to themselves. It wasn't every day they saw a child in court, especially one this small. "What's the little girl's name?" the judge asked. "Vera," her mother replied softly. Caprio turned to the child. "Hi, Vera. Would you like to come up here and help me out?" Vera hesitated, looked up at her mother, then gave a tiny nod, and began to walk slowly toward the judge's bench. Her shoes squeaked just once on the polished floor. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. His tone became lighter and more playful, as if he were talking to his own grandchild. "What's your full name, sweetheart?" "Oh, Vera," she whispered, her voice so soft it barely made it across the bench. Her eyes were wide, nervous, and flickered toward her mother for reassurance. She stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, the classic pose of a child doing something brave for the first time. "And how old are you?" Caprio asked with a warm smile. 6. Vera's answer came out a little louder this time, her confidence just beginning to peek through the initial shyness. 6 years old? Wow, he said, his eyebrows shooting up in exaggerated surprise. He leaned back in his chair, nodding as if 6 was the most impressive number he'd heard all day. His voice carried both admiration and a hint of playfulness, designed to let Vera know she was doing just fine. "Do you go to school?" Vera nodded quickly, a small smile forming at the corners of her lips. Her posture relaxed just a little, not much, but enough to show she was warming up to him. "What's your favorite subject? Is it math?" Caprio's tone was upbeat now, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Yes," she replied with a shy nod, but this time there was no hesitation in her voice. "English?" He followed up instantly, raising one brow in mock suspicion. "Yes," she said again, more quickly this time. The judge chuckled, his laughter deep and full of warmth. He pointed playfully in her direction and said, "I think you're going to say yes to everything I ask, huh?" Vera let out a small giggle, her first real laugh since stepping into the courtroom. The ice had finally broken. Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even the usually stern clerk at the front desk allowed herself a small grin. Judge Caprio tilted his head curiously. "So tell me, Vera, do you think that someday when you get a little older, not old like me, but after you graduate college, do you think maybe you'd want to be a judge?" Vera shook her head firmly. "I want to be a teacher." The judge's face lit up. "Well, that's a wonderful goal," he said. "Teachers help people improve their lives, and you'd get so much joy from teaching, wouldn't you?" "Yes," she replied. "Then you keep visualizing that," he said gently. "If you believe in it, it'll happen." Vera suddenly leaned forward a little, like she remembered something important. "At school," she began, "there was this day when my friend Lucas didn't have a pen. He looked really sad. And my teacher, she put a pen in his desk when he wasn't looking, and she pretended it was magic. The judge smiled softly. "And how did that make you feel?" Vera smiled back. "I liked that. I want to be like her. Want to be..." The courtroom for a moment was completely still. Even Carl, usually preoccupied with getting the right angle for his camera, paused his filming. A few murmurs passed through the spectators, and the clerk who'd been filing papers during the exchange stopped, her hand resting on the table. She smiled. Judge Caprio gave a thoughtful nod. "Well," he said, "I think the world would be lucky to have a teacher like you." There was a brief pause in the courtroom after the laughter settled. Judge Frank Caprio looked at Vera, the little girl still standing confidently next to him, her hands clasped behind her back, swaying gently on her feet. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough for the moment to feel like a secret shared between the two of them. "Would you like to be the judge for 5 minutes?" he asked, his tone warm and playful. Vera's eyes widened. She looked at her mother for a second, then turned back and nodded with a quiet but eager voice. "Yes." Caprio smiled, delighted. "Well then, from now on, you're going to help me decide your mom's case, but you have to promise me something." She looked up, curious. "You must be fair and honest. Do you promise?" "I promise," Vera said, her tone sincere. The courtroom murmured with soft chuckles. Even the clerk, who usually kept a straight face, raised her eyebrows and smiled. A few rows back, a man Vera's uncle held up his phone, recording the scene discreetly. His eyes shimmered with pride. "Well," Caprio said, sitting back in his chair and folding his hands together. "Here's the case. Your mom got a ticket for parking on the sidewalk. The fine was originally $100, but because it wasn't paid on time, now it's up to $300. He paused for a moment, giving Vera a moment to take it in. She tilted her head slightly. Her small fingers played with the edge of the bench as she listened. "Let's hear what your mom has to say about it first," the judge continued. "We always listen to both sides before making a decision, right?" Vera nodded, looking over at her mother, who shifted her weight and stepped a little closer to the microphone. "It happened late at night," the mother began. "Around 3 in the morning. I had gone to my cousin's house. There was a small get-together, just family. The street was packed, and the only space I found was up on the sidewalk. I didn't want anyone hitting my car. But when I tried to leave, the police had already blocked off the street to shut the party down. I couldn't move the car." Vera listened carefully, her eyes fixed on her mother, as if trying to imagine the scene. In the back row, a gray-haired woman leaned toward her neighbor and whispered, "Sounds fair enough to me." Caprio nodded thoughtfully. "All right, Judge Vera," he said, turning back to her. "Now comes the hard part, making the decision." He leaned forward again, lowering his voice with the seriousness of a teacher giving a test. "You have 4 options. First, your mom pays the full $300. Second, we remove the late fee and she only pays $100. Third, we cut it in half and she pays $50. Or fourth, we let her off completely and she pays nothing. Which one do you think is fair?" Vera pressed her lips together and looked down at her shoes. She thought for a moment. Then she lifted her head with certainty and said, "Number 3? Caprio raised an eyebrow. "And how much is that?" $50, Vera answered, her voice firm. "So you want your mom to pay $50? "Yes," she said again, standing straighter. The judge nodded slowly, clearly impressed. He turned his head toward Vera's mother, and with a mischievous grin said, "She wants your money. I'm sorry." The courtroom erupted with laughter. Her mother looked down at Vera with a mix of pride and playful disbelief. She shook her head, laughing, unsure what to say. "Well," Caprio said, chuckling, "I think we've just seen a future judge in action." He glanced over at the clerk, who was now grinning as she typed the notes. Even Carl, the ever-observant cameraman in the back, paused his recording for just a second to smile. Vera looked around the room. She wasn't just a little girl anymore. For those few minutes, she had become someone who could be listened to, respected, even trusted with a decision. And she had chosen fairness. And so, a small courtroom in Rhode Island, with its wooden benches and flickering lights, became just for a while a place where justice came with pink ribbons, steady voices, and the wise simplicity of a child's heart. There was a quiet hum of laughter still lingering in the courtroom from Vera's decision to fine her mom $50. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, watching her as she stood with the casual confidence only a child could manage. Her small frame didn't quite reach the height of the bench, but in that moment, she carried herself like someone twice her size. Then, With a curious squint, the judge leaned forward again, tapping the edge of the bench lightly with his fingers. "Now I see you're here with your mom," he said thoughtfully. "But who else came with you today?" But before he could speak, Vera lifted her small hand and pointed behind her mother. "There," she said with a smile. "My baby sister." All eyes in the courtroom turned toward the back row, where a woman in her 60s sat quietly. Her gray hair was pinned back neatly, and she held a toddler snugly against her chest. The child, no more than 2 years old, clutched a milk bottle with both hands, drinking peacefully, completely unaware that they were sitting in the middle of a municipal court hearing. The baby blinked slowly, eyes unfocused, lost in the kind of calm that only a full belly and a warm lap can bring. A few people chuckled softly. Even Caprio let out a warm laugh. "Well, I think she's the calmest person in the room," he said, smiling. "She has no idea where she is, and that's probably for the best." Vera giggled again, covering her mouth with both hands as she noticed her baby sister looking back toward her. Their eyes met a moment only siblings could share, and Vera's face lit up with joy. She gave a tiny wave. Her sister, too small to wave back, simply blinked in response. Caprio smiled. "That's wonderful. And who else?" Vera hesitated for just a beat, then added with a giggle, "That's my grandma and my uncle." The laughter in the room started again, soft and genuine. Someone from the back whispered, "She brought the whole neighborhood." A man seated in the front row, who had been quiet until now, shook his head, chuckling to himself. He slapped his knee gently as if to say, "Only in this courtroom." "Well," said Caprio, nodding along as though taking attendance, "it sounds like this is a family event. We should have served coffee and donuts." A few light claps of laughter broke out again. Even the court clerk, usually reserved and composed, looked up from her paperwork, amusement dancing in her eyes. Then Judge Caprio checked his watch. "I'm guessing," he said slowly, "you've been here since about 8 o'clock this morning?" Vera nodded. "Yes." "And now it's almost 9:30, right?" "Yes." The judge raised his eyebrows. "Have you had breakfast yet?" Vera shook her head. "No, we had to come early." Caprio leaned in, putting a hand to his chest in mock disbelief. "You're telling me you're here, in court, and you haven't eaten anything?" Vera let out a tiny sigh and nodded. "I'm hungry." That was it, the moment that melted the entire room. A low, collective awe spread like a breeze through the courtroom. The man in the front row laughed out loud and wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. The judge, of course, was already cooking up something. "Well, now listen," Caprio said, folding his hands together in front of him. "I'm thinking of making a deal with your mom." Vera's head tilted slightly in interest. Her mother looked on, smiling nervously, unsure where this was going. "If," the judge began, "your mom agrees to buy you breakfast as soon as you leave this courtroom, then I will dismiss the entire ticket. All $300. He paused, watching Vera's expression. "But you have to agree to the deal too." Vera turned to look at her mother, then back to the judge. She didn't answer right away. She smiled, but her lips pressed together like she was unsure. "Think carefully," Caprio added with dramatic flair. "This is a big deal, very serious. Once you say yes, there's no turning back." The entire courtroom leaned in, waiting. "I think," Vera began shyly. Caprio raised an eyebrow and grinned. "If you say yes to breakfast, I'll erase the fine. If not, well, I guess your mom pays $50. What do you think?" Vera giggled, her voice sweet and certain. "Breakfast!" And with that one word, the room exploded in laughter and applause. The judge let out a hearty chuckle, clapping his hands once. "That's it then," he said. "Breakfast it is." The clerk shook her head, still smiling as she typed. "Never a dull moment," she murmured under her breath. Carl, the quiet cameraman in the back, raised his camera slowly, clicking the shutter. He had filmed hundreds of cases in this courtroom, but this one moment felt different. He snapped one more photo as Vera looked up at the judge with proud, innocent eyes. Judge Caprio looked down at her again and softened his voice. "Thank you, Vera. You've done a great job today. Really, you should be proud of yourself." The little girl beamed. The kind of smile only a 6-year-old can wear is a mix of accomplishment, relief, and the simple joy of knowing pancakes were probably in her near future. In this small courtroom in Providence, where cases are usually about violations and penalties, something unexpected had just happened. A child had reminded everyone in the room, judge, clerk, defendant, and stranger alike, that justice can sometimes look like compassion, and that sometimes the most reasonable verdict is breakfast. As the hearing came to an end, Vera stepped down from the bench with a little bounce in her step. Her hand found her mother's, and the two walked toward the exit together. The courtroom doors, usually passed through with relief or frustration, now felt more like the closing of a stage curtain after a quiet, remarkable performance. She didn't wave or bow, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the room was still watching her, not with curiosity, but with affection. To them, she was no longer just a little girl in a pink dress. She was the judge who had reminded them what fairness, warmth, and innocence looked like. And though no one would likely remember the specifics of her mother's parking violation, they would all remember Vera and the breakfast verdict. Judge Caprio stayed seated behind his desk, watching them go. His hands rested lightly on the bench, fingers tapping slowly as the courtroom emptied. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that came with a quiet sigh, the kind that only follows something that has touched the heart in an unexpected way. His eyes wandered for a moment, unfocused, as if tracing back through years of cases, years of people. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "A 6-year-old girl knows the difference between right and wrong. The real question is, do we?" Behind him, the court clerk, a silver-haired woman who had worked alongside him for over a decade, approached quietly and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You know, Frank," she said gently, "that might have been the hardest case you've ever handled." Caprio chuckled softly, still watching the door where Vera had disappeared. "And probably the one I'll remember the longest." Later that afternoon, in the corner of a quiet newsroom, Carl uploaded the video he had captured that morning. He had edited nothing. Every giggle, every look between sisters, every thoughtful pause, he left it all in. The title read, "The $300 Breakfast, and the Little Girl Who Taught a Courtroom About Kindness." He clicked publish and leaned back in his chair. "Some stories," he said aloud, "write themselves." And the story did what stories like this always do. It traveled. Within hours, the video had been shared across social media, gathering views and comments at a surprising speed. People didn't talk much about the legal fine. They talked about Vera, about her calm, thoughtful voice, about the way she looked at her baby sister, about how gently she spoke and how clearly she made her decision. One comment read, "We need more judges like her, who is 6 years old and already knows how to balance justice with compassion." Another wrote, "She's not just a future teacher, she's a teacher now to all of us." Vera herself didn't know about the video. She was too busy enjoying her well-earned breakfast, a warm pancake and a glass of orange juice, shared with her family at a little diner not far from the courthouse. Her baby sister sat in a high chair beside her, chewing on a plastic spoon. Her grandma gently patted syrup off the toddler's chin with a napkin. Vera didn't say much, but she smiled that quiet kind of smile that children carry when they've done something good, and they know it, even if they can't explain why. Back in the courtroom, everything had returned to its usual rhythm. More cases were heard, more tickets were paid, more paperwork stacked up neatly on the clerk's desk. But something had shifted just slightly. A softness lingered in the room, a warmth in the air that hadn't been there the day before. For Judge Frank Caprio, it was a reminder that courtrooms were not just places for rules and punishment, but also places where hearts could be seen, and where people, even the smallest ones, could be heard. And perhaps, he thought, this was how justice worked best. Not only in the black and white of legal codes, but in the gentle gray where understanding lives. Because sometimes, a child holding a milk bottle is the calmest person in the room. Sometimes, a giggle from a 6-year-old is the sound of fairness. And sometimes, the most reasonable sentence a judge can give is breakfast. And that's the end of our story today. A $300 parking ticket, a little girl with a big heart, and a judge who reminded us all that justice doesn't always have to be stern or serious. Sometimes, it's as simple and as powerful as choosing breakfast over a fine. If this story brought a smile to your face, inspired you, or reminded you of someone special, don't forget to hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs a little lift today, and let me know in the comments. What's the kindest verdict you've ever witnessed? These stories are free of political or religious intent and are designed to inspire, not to reflect or represent any real-world entities. Just moments of human kindness, shared with the hope of making your day a little brighter. Thanks for spending your time here with me. I'll see you in the next story, where the courtroom meets compassion and the smallest voices often teach the biggest lessons. Until then, stay kind, stay curious, and maybe, just maybe, buy someone breakfast.